The trees had stopped blooming long before the bear returned. Their branches were brittle, gray from drought and smoke, the soil beneath them dry as bone. The orchard had once been a hum of gold and green, honey thick in the air, bees moving like sparks through sunlight. But now it was only dust. He came from the woods below, slow and heavy, his fur clotted with mud. His breath came rough from the climb, but he didn't stop. The scent of apples lingered faintly, ghosts of sweetness buried in the bark. He remembered this place. He'd come here years ago, when the trees bent low with fruit and the air was alive with sound. He'd found food then, fallen apples, soft and warm from the sun, and the strange hum of bees that never feared him. Now, there was nothing but the whisper of wind. The bear reached the top of the hill and stood, breathing deep. The land below spread out in folds of brown and gold, the farmhouse a pale scar at the edge of the field. Smoke rose faintly from its chimney, thin, uncertain. He turned his head toward it. The air carried another scent now, something human, old, familiar. He grunted low in his chest. At the bottom of the hill, Irene Dalton knelt beside the last of the hives. She'd built them with her husband years ago, rows of cedar boxes painted white, now cracked and leaning. Her hands were thick with years of work, the skin darkened by sun, but still gentle when she touched the frame. There were bees again, a few at least, sluggish, clinging to the comb, moving with effort. They made a sound she'd missed so much it hurt to hear it again. A weak, uncertain buzz, like a prayer spoken too quietly to be heard. "You're late this year," she murmured. The bees didn't answer. Her husband used to say that silence was nature's way of waiting. He'd died 2 winters ago, and she'd been waiting ever since. For spring, for the bees, for the orchard, to remember what it was supposed to be. Now she thought maybe it was waiting for her. She heard the sound before she saw him, the slow crunch of weight through dry grass. She straightened, shading her eyes. At first, she thought it was just another shadow among the trees. Then it moved. The bear stepped from behind a dead trunk, his fur catching the weak sun. He was thin, ribs faint beneath his coat, but his eyes were steady, almost calm. Irene didn't move. He stopped at the edge of the orchard. They watched each other for a long time. Two creatures shaped by hunger and memory, each wondering what the other had come back for. Finally, she said softly, "You remember this place too, don't you?" The bear blinked. A wind passed between them, carrying the faint hum of the bees. Small, tired, but alive. He lowered his head, sniffed the air once, and moved on, slow and heavy, toward the upper hill. Irene watched him go. The bees buzzed weakly around her hands. "Go on," she whispered to them. "He won't hurt you." When she looked up again, the bear was gone. Only the sway of grass marked where he'd been. And in that stillness, the sound of the bees seemed louder, not frantic or afraid, but steady, sure, as if something deep in the earth had remembered its rhythm. That night, Irene sat on the porch, listening. The wind moved through the trees. Somewhere on the hill, she heard a branch snap. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The bees were silent again, sleeping. But she thought she could hear something else now. Deep under the quiet, a pulse in the earth. The slow, patient heart of a place learning to live again. The second morning rose in a haze of yellow light, the kind that made the whole valley look like it had been brushed in honey. The air was warmer and the orchard smelled faintly of damp earth, of sap rising again after months of stillness. Irene Dalton woke to that smell. For the first time in years, it didn't carry dust. When she stepped out onto the porch, she could hear the bees. Not many, not yet, but enough to make the air hum. The sound was uneven, thin in places, but real. It filled the silence like breath. She smiled despite herself. "Well," she murmured, "you came back after all." At the top of the orchard, the bear moved through the trees. He was slower now, cautious, as if he knew this place had changed while he was gone. His paws left deep impressions in the soft ground, each step sinking into the thawed soil. The scent of honey drifted faintly through the air. Not strong, but unmistakable. He stopped beside one of the old apple trees, the bark rough and gray beneath his claws. The branches were still bare, but tiny buds dotted the ends, green as newborn eyes. He leaned his head against the trunk. The wood was warm from the morning sun. From somewhere below came the hum of bees. He stood still, listening. The sound wasn't constant. It pulsed, like something learning to breathe again. He grunted softly, turned toward the sound, and started down the hill. Irene was crouched by the hives when she saw him again. He came slowly, pushing through the tall grass, shoulders rolling under his heavy coat. The sunlight caught in his fur, showing streaks of brown and silver. He looked older now, or maybe just truer, worn down to what he really was. She didn't move, didn't reach for the shovel leaning against the post. "You again," she said quietly. "I figured you'd gone back to the woods." The bear stopped a few yards away. His head lifted slightly, nostrils flaring. He sniffed the air once, then lowered it again, calm. Irene smiled. "You smell the honey, don't you?" A few bees drifted lazily between them. She watched them hover near the bear's face, and to her surprise, he didn't flinch. One even landed briefly on his muzzle before rising again, glinting gold in the light. The bear blinked, unbothered. She felt something move inside her chest, a warmth she hadn't felt since her husband died. Not joy exactly, but recognition. "I think you were here before," she said softly. "Back when the hives were full." The bear turned his head toward the nearest box. The buzzing grew stronger. "I don't know why they're back now," Irene said, "but they came when you did." For a long moment, there was no sound except the bees. Then the bear gave a deep, rumbling exhale. Not a growl, but something closer to a sigh. He turned away, moving up the hill again, his shoulders brushing through the high grass. Irene watched him go until the trees swallowed him. When she turned back to the hives, the bees were moving differently, faster now, more confident. They streamed in and out of the frames, golden wings flashing in the sunlight. She laughed under her breath. "Well, I'll be damned." She reached for her gloves, her veil, her tools. It felt like starting over. By afternoon, the air shimmered with the sound of bees. They filled the orchard like music. Not loud, but steady. The rhythm of something that had remembered its purpose. Irene moved carefully among them, lifting frames, checking combs. Her hands were steady again, her breath calm. The bees didn't seem to mind her presence. They worked around her, brushing her sleeves and hair without fear. Above, the clouds drifted apart. Sunlight poured over the orchard, warm and gold. She looked up toward the hill. The bear was there again, a dark shape against the sky, sitting beneath one of the old apple trees. He wasn't moving, just watching. She raised a hand in greeting. The bear didn't respond, but the air between them seemed to thrum. A bee landed on her wrist. She didn't brush it away. The world felt whole again, for now. And for the first time in years, the orchard didn't sound empty. It sounded alive. By the third morning, the orchard was glowing. Not bright like fire, not loud like summer. It was the kind of light that comes when the world exhales after holding its breath too long. The buds had opened overnight. Hundreds of them. The trees that had stood gray and bare for years were suddenly veined with white and pale pink. Irene Dalton woke before sunrise. She hadn't needed an alarm in months. The bees were enough. They'd begun their soft, deliberate hum long before dawn, their bodies brushing against the window screens as if to tell her it's time. When she stepped outside, the air was thick with the smell of blossoms. Sweet, clean, almost too much. It clung to her hair and clothes. The whole orchard looked different in the early light, like it had been rebuilt in the dark. And above it all, she saw him again. The bear stood halfway up the hill, framed between two blooming trees. His fur caught the morning light, brown, gold, the faintest shimmer of silver, and the petals from the nearest branches drifted around him with the wind. He was perfectly still, watching, listening. The bees swarmed near him, not in fear but in rhythm, orbiting his broad head like bits of sunlight. She walked to the edge of the field. "You've brought the whole place back," she said, mostly to herself. The bear didn't move. Irene smiled. "You remember this smell, don't you? Apples. My husband used to say it meant we'd survived another winter." The bees passed between them like a veil. Thousands of them, their hum deep and even. She could feel it in her ribs. She wondered briefly if sound could become memory, if something could echo across seasons the way grief does. The bear shifted his weight, the faintest groan of muscle and ground. Then, he turned his head toward the oldest tree in the orchard, the one that had never bloomed since the fire. The air grew quiet. Even the bees slowed. The tree stood apart from the others, its trunk scarred black from old heat, its limbs half dead, bark split down the center like a wound that refused to close. Irene had stopped expecting anything from it, but when she followed the bear's gaze, she saw something she hadn't before. A single branch, low, half hidden by shadow, was alive. It held one cluster of blossoms, white as snow, trembling in the faint breeze. The bear made a low sound in his throat. Not anger, not hunger. It was almost sorrowful or reverent. Irene stepped closer to the tree. The ground beneath it was soft, rich, damp with morning dew. The bees began to move again, circling the branch, landing gently among the flowers. Their sound deepened, a hum that seemed to sink into the soil itself. She looked up at the bear. He had lowered himself onto his haunches, huge and silent. For a moment, the world felt perfectly still, as if the earth itself was listening. Then, one of the petals fell. It drifted down between them and landed on the ground, catching the light. The air changed. The hum of the bees shifted, louder, brighter, harmonizing with the wind. The blossoms across the orchard shimmered faintly, their color deepening as if some unseen current had passed through them. And the bear, he looked upward, eyes half closed, breathing slow, steady. The moment stretched until she could no longer tell where the sound ended and the stillness began. When it passed, the orchard was quiet again. The bees had scattered to their work, the wind had softened, and Irene found herself standing beside the old tree with tears running down her face. Not sadness, not joy, just something vast. Something she hadn't felt since her husband's hands still smelled of earth and honey. She reached out and touched the blackened bark. It was warm. "Thank you," she whispered. The bear rose, turned back toward the woods, and began walking away. Slow, heavy, each step sinking into the wet grass. The bees followed him partway, then turned back to the tree. By the time he disappeared into the trees, the sun had climbed higher, turning the blossoms into mirrors for the light. That night, Irene sat on her porch with a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago. The moon rose over the orchard, white and round, shining on the thousands of petals that shimmered faintly in its glow. The bees slept, the wind barely moved, and from the woods beyond the hill, she heard it, a sound like the low murmur of a heartbeat, rising and fading with the wind. It wasn't a growl, and it wasn't the hum of bees. It was the two of them together, the living and the remembering, echoing through the dark. By the fourth morning, the world smelled of smoke and flowers. It was the strangest combination, sweet and sharp, like a memory that couldn't decide whether it belonged to joy or grief. The air itself felt heavy with it, thick enough to taste. Irene Dalton stepped out before sunrise. The sky above the orchard was a dim bruise of gray and orange, the kind of light that comes before a storm or after a fire. But there was no fire, not anymore. Only that scent, seeping from the soil and the hives. The bees were already awake. She could hear them before she reached the first box, their hum deeper than before, steadier, almost rhythmic. When she lifted the lid, the sound swelled around her, filling the air like a low song. They were working faster than she'd ever seen. Frames heavy, wax thick and perfect. The honey darker than usual. Not gold, but amber with a shadow in it. She touched the edge of a comb, the surface soft and warm. The smell rose up at once. Not the sharp sweetness she expected, but something deeper, earthier, with the faint trace of wood ash and apples. She closed her eyes. It was the scent of her husband's jacket after a day burning fallen limbs, the scent of smoke clinging to his hair, to her own hands when they'd built this place. She breathed it in. "You remember too, don't you?" she said quietly. The bees kept working. The bear came down from the woods again just after sunrise. He moved slower than before, his fur heavy with dew, his paws dark with mud. He stopped at the edge of the orchard, where the light first touched the grass. The air around him shimmered faintly. Heat, maybe, or something like it. The bees noticed him at once. A few broke from their work and drifted toward him, circling his head, landing softly on his fur. He didn't shake them off. He just stood there, breathing, eyes half closed. From the porch, Irene watched. It looked almost like a ritual, the way the bees touched him, the way the air between them seemed to vibrate. She walked toward him, slow and careful, the hem of her coat brushing the wet grass. "You've come for the hives again," she said softly, "or for what's left of them." The bear turned his head slightly. His breath steamed in the cool morning air. She stopped a few feet away, close enough to smell him. Earth, rain, and something faintly sweet, like wild honey. The bees moved between them. "Do you hear it too?" she asked. He blinked once, slow. The hum was stronger now, not just in the air, but underfoot. The ground seemed to hold it, passing it from root to root, from tree to tree. The blossoms trembled on their branches, shedding petals that drifted down like snow. One landed on the bear's shoulder, another on Irene's sleeve. The scent of smoke deepened. By midday, the wind picked up. The blossoms fell faster, swirling in spirals through the orchard. The bees worked on, tireless, ignoring the coming storm. Irene gathered her tools, but she didn't go inside. She couldn't. The world felt charged, not dangerous, just full. The bear had settled near the oldest tree again, the blackened one that had bloomed only once. He sat at its base, head bowed, huge and still. The air around him shimmered faintly again. Heat or light or something older. When the first drop of rain fell, it hit the earth and hissed. The scent that followed was almost unbearable. Flowers and ash, sugar and loss. Irene sank to her knees. The bees rose in a golden cloud, circling her, circling him. Their hums swelling into something that wasn't sound anymore, but vibration. Through her chest, through the soil, through everything. It felt like the world remembering itself. When the storm passed, the orchard glowed. Every branch, every leaf, every petal was glazed with rain and honey light. The bear was gone. The hives dripped slowly from their edges. Not clear honey, but that same dark amber. It caught the light like molten glass. Irene reached out, ran a finger through it, brought it to her lips. The taste stopped her breath. It was smoke and apple blossom, salt and sweetness. It was everything the land had been and lost and somehow kept. She stood there for a long time, her fingers still glistening, the bees quieting around her, their hum fading into the soft sigh of evening. The sky broke open again, this time with sunlight. And for a moment, the orchard looked exactly as it must have once been, green, gold, alive. That night, Irene poured a jar of the new honey and placed it on the porch rail. The air was still, heavy with the scent of bloom. From the woods came a low sound, deep, rolling, almost like thunder. She smiled. "I saved you some," she said to the dark. The wind stirred and the bees in their hives shifted once, a faint collective murmur, as if the earth itself had answered. She leaned back in her chair, eyes closing. The smell of honey and smoke wrapped around her like a memory made new. And far away on the hill where the blossoms met the forest, a massive shape moved slowly through the trees, back into silence.